So I played tennis. I started up again a few years ago, and I really couldn't love it anymore. And I had a slight tear in a rotator cuff in October, and I got all the ultrasounds, got a couple PRP injections, have been doing rehab exercises, and now I've been back on the court for a couple of months now, and I'm feeling great. And so, aside from the rehab stuff, I think what has really helped me, like I feel now I'm playing even maybe better than when I left because I bought this mobility program off of this personal trainer that I saw on Instagram, and it's really helped me open up my hips. Like I don't think my hips have ever had so much mobility, and my shoulders feel better than they've ever felt before. And I didn't realize because otherwise I used to take martial arts, so I'm fairly flexible. I had no idea that I needed to do all this mobility training. Could you speak to a little bit about how important mobility is in athleticism and longevity?
Yeah. So first thing is we lose our mobility over time primarily because of our habits. Our movement is just a habit, and it's a response to our environment and our the daily shapes and postures and positions we put ourselves into. And most of us, unfortunately, are strapped to a desk and chair for the majority of the day, and that's going to create some adaptations and stagnation in a lot of different areas. Three key areas in particular. One is your ankles. Two is your hips, and three is your thorax. Basically, if you took, from your bottom of your ribs to your shoulders, and then inside that, your rib cage, your thoracic spine, all of that basically will get locked up from sitting all the time. And so those are the
Okay.
three areas we want to primarily address. Now, from there, we also have to understand mobility is going to have a much longer lasting effect, and it will stick longer if you can actually control that range of motion. And so the to explain that further is if I popped open my treatment table right now and I laid you on there, Michael, I could stretch you for the next half hour. And there's facilities that do this, stretch you for the next half hour, and you're going to feel amazing when you get up. But by the time you get in your car and drive home, you're going to start regressing back to your original range of motion. And the reason is I've created what's I call naive range of motion. You don't know what to do with it. And so your body's always trying to protect itself. And so it's going to go back to what it feels safe and comfortable with. And so it's going to regress back to those tighter positions. And so you need to create mobility that you can actually control. So that doesn't mean static stretching is bad. Static stretching has its place. But if you're going to loosen one part, and I always give the analogy, that's kind of telling your body what not to do. It's like, okay, I'm going to tell my hip flexor, I don't want you to be so tight, but then that might have been one of the only things stabilizing your lumbar spine because that's where it attaches. And then your body's saying, okay, well,
Ah,
if you're not going to give me something to stabilize my lumbar spine, I'm going back to the hip flexor. But if I can say, okay, well, no, now that we got that opened up, let's teach you how to stabilize around your hips by creating better hip and pelvic stability and better core stability. And then once you can get better stability and control, it allows that mobility to actually take hold and stay there. And so
right.
just laying there and stretching, if you stretch all the time and you're like, I don't get any looser, yeah, that's because it's not going to stick. I also use the analogy of like tuning a guitar. When you see someone tuning a guitar, they don't just loosen all the strings or tighten all the strings. They listen to each string and say, okay, well, this one may need a little bit of tightening. This one may need a little bit of loosening. And there's some people who are actually too loose, that actually have too much mobility, especially if you have a history of martial arts or gymnastics or something of that nature. And some
Yoga.
people just naturally are a little bit more hypermobile. And so those people, I don't want them stretching. I need to give them better control so they can actually get mobility because their body's putting on the brakes and not letting them move to protect them again. And so it's incredibly important that we have it, because if you can't get into certain positions, well, then you can't create stability. And if you can't create stability, well, then you can't create strength. And if you can't create strength, then you can't create speed and power. And you just kind of, everything falls off of that. And so it also limits your menu quite extensively, and we can go deeper into that if we want to, but it limits your menu pretty extensively as far as what I can prescribe for you in terms of exercise.
Huh. Well, that's really great because I know my left hip has been historically super tight, and I thought that's just how it was. And now since I've been doing these exercises, it's like every other day I've done like mobility 101. Now I'm doing athletes mobility, and the 90-90 stretch.
Yeah.
So when you're in that, and then the leg that's behind you, I've been slowly training to move it up further and further. And when I first
Yes.
started, it was on the ground. I'm like, okay, this leg's dead. This hip's finished. And now, like 6 months later, I'm getting like 45-degree movement on it, and it feels so much better. But it makes sense what you said, that it's lucky that I've been working out and playing tennis during this process, because as I was loosening it up, if I wasn't also tightening with exercise, then that might have turned naive and caused me problems. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and then to where that can create an issue is what that's specifically looking at is that is the what's called the internal rotation of your back hip. And so
Mm,
if you don't have that, you have higher likelihood of a knee injury. You
okay.
also are not going to be able to rotate as well because now if your hip can't internally rotate, let's say if you're a right-handed if you're doing if you're a right-handed tennis player on your forehand and you go to plant your left leg and you go to swing, well, if that left hip can't internally rotate, you're still going to try to get the ball to where you want it to go, right? So you're just going to figure out someplace else to get that rotation from. And so it's either going to
Right.
go down or it's going to go up. It could go down and create some issues in your knee. It could cause you, if you're especially if you're doing tennis, you're doing the move. If you can't rotate your hip, you're a little more stuck. You're more likely to roll your ankle, or it could go up. It can end up where you show up and say, "I have low back pain," and you've been treating and icing and heating and stimming and doing everything for your back, and it's not getting better because it's really a hip problem that your problem is coming from.